What's up, YouTube? J Dill here. So this is another one of my presentations. This one's going to be on dinosaurs. I'm going to be going over different scientific evidences as to why I don't believe that they are millions of years old, and evidence that they could have lived contemporaneously with humans. I always like to start a presentation out with a little bit of humor. I realize this picture is bashing creationists, but personally, I could picture Jesus holding a baby dinosaur, and that would be kind of like cute. I don't know. I think this picture's kind of cute. So, the term dinosaur didn't come around until 1841, and the term was coined by Richard Owen. Now, many of the ways that you can describe a dinosaur can also describe a dragon. And dragons have been found named in the Bible, named by the Europeans, Greeks, Middle Eastern cultures, India, China, Japan, Korea, and many others. So what is a dragon? Dragons have been described as being reptilian, serpent-like, lizard-like. Some of them have 3 claws, most of them have scales, and some of them have bat-like wings. This is an actual fossil. It was basically named from the Harry Potter series. Draco Rex Hogwartsia, from Hogwarts, the wizardry school. And as you can see, when you think of a typical mythical drawing of a dragon, this is kind of what you picture. Put some skin on it and put some eyes in it, then that's kind of what you envision. In Job 40:15-24, it describes something called the behemoth. It says that it eats grass, so it's an herbivore. It's not a crocodile or an alligator. Its legs and its belly are strong. Its tail is like a cedar tree, so it's not a hippo or an elephant. They have very, very small tails. And before anybody goes, well, it's not saying that it's real long or real thick would you ever describe a hippo's tail or an elephant's tail as a cedar tree? And if you honestly wouldn't, then you cannot say that it was a hippo or an elephant. It had bones like tubes of bronze, limbs like bars of iron. It can withstand a turbulent river, and it rests under the reeds. We have an organism that actually meets all of those criteria. Grass-eating sauropods. Cropping low vegetation, such as grass, may explain why some of these titanosaurs, and those were some of the largest sauropod dinosaurs that ever existed, have very wide mouths, reminiscent of the wide mouth of the grass-feeding hippo and white rhino. This down here is a coprolite. If it looks like a pile of dung, it's because it is, but fossilized. Now, whenever an organism eats grass, you end up with phytoliths, which is basically absorbed silica from the soil that the grass picked up. Now, you can't see actual grass in these coprolites, but you can see the phytoliths, and you can identify what grasses were present by the phytoliths. So, it proves that titanosaurs were eating grass, which, by the way, evolutionists did not believe that grass was around during that time. Okay, these are titanosaurs. This is a 2-scale drawing. Here is a human in comparison to the largest titanosaur. Now you can obviously see that these tails could easily be described or compared to a large tree like a cedar. This is just so you can kind of visualize what it would look like. This may have been what a titanosaur would have looked like. Now, the Bible, when it speaks of behemoth, says that it rests under the reeds. Well, it's interesting. Near the Red Sea, while surveying the terrain around the tip of Aqaba, Humphreys, which was on a research team, found many areas of reeds growing in the undeveloped portions of the shore. We have one seeming paradox of freshwater springs permeating the shoreline of saltwater sea. So right along the shoreline where you could have deep enough water to at least mostly or partially submerge a large animal, there were also reeds there. And it's interesting enough, Aqaba is where is very near to where Job was supposed to have lived. The land of Uz has been tentatively placed between Edom and Arabia, or in the Haran, or near Palmyra. So Job lived right near the Red Sea. He lived right near where these dinosaurs could possibly have been able to go underneath these reeds. It also, the book of Job describes Leviathan, which we believe would not have been a dinosaur, but rather an aquatic reptile. So Leviathan cannot be caught on a fish hook. It's not to be played with. Traders cannot capture it, cannot be harpooned. The gods fear it. Has strong limbs, a double coat of mail, and it goes on to say, it has terrible teeth. We would probably assume that it had sharp teeth. It had scales and shields in rows, impenetrable to sword, spear, arrow, and clubs, and that flame came from its mouth, which could boil the water. Now, before you say, oh, now I know it's just a fable, let me show you some examples here in a minute, just to kind of open up your imagination. So, as a graphic depiction, could this have been Leviathan? Possibly. Could this have been Leviathan? Sarcosuchus was the largest, in terms of what we would now call crocodiles. This is like a modern crocodile skull, and this would have been what Sarcosuchus was, his size. So you can see it was very large and it was aquatic. So let's go back to that. You don't believe that there could have been fire-breathing things. If I told you that there was a little beetle that could spew boiling hot liquid out in a matter of milliseconds that could burn you, would you believe it? If you didn't know that it was true, you probably wouldn't, but there is. It's called the bombardier beetle. It's only 2 centimeters long, but it mixes chemicals in its abdomen at 500 pulses per second. These are the 2 chemicals that it mixes together, and within a matter of milliseconds it reaches the temperature of boiling water, and yet the beetle itself is unharmed by it, but this is how it evades its predators. You can actually spray this up to 8 inches. Electric eels. If I told you there was an organism that could power a Christmas tree's lights, would you believe it? Well, if you didn't know that it existed in nature, you probably wouldn't believe it. But most eels can supply up to 600 volts of electricity around an amp, which it only takes about a half an amp to kill a human. It has approximately 6,000 specialized electrolytic cells and can produce 5 times the amount of electricity that a standard wall socket produces. Anacondas have been found documented to reach up to 25 feet long and be 330 pounds. They have found giant catfish that are 8.2 feet long and 220 pounds. The giant squid, which until just about a decade ago they had never found a live species of it, they recently found a live species of it, and they've documented cases have found to be 43 feet long, weigh 400 pounds, and they can live at depths up to 3,300 feet. So my question again is, before you make the claim that no, this animal couldn't have spewed forth flame or perhaps some sort of boiling mixture from its mouth, take another look from these examples and see there are amazing things out there in nature, and it is possible. So people have asked, well, how in the world did the dinosaurs fit on the ark? This is a scaled drawing where you have man and a sauropod dinosaur drawn to scale. The ark itself, and this is a conservative figure, could have held 1,403,644 cubed feet of space. It had 3 different decks, a skylight, all the works. And if you do any research into baraminology, which is the research of God's created kinds, what you can find is that most modern day species very easily, if you have 100 species today, it could have evolved from 7 to 8 species, parent species to begin with. So could dinosaurs and man have lived together? So this is evidence I want you to consider, but I'm not putting forth this as fact, but it is something I would recommend that you look more in depth into, is the Alvis Delk track. The story goes that Alvis, he was going through the Paluxy riverbeds and happened to find a fossil which at the time he thought it was just a dinosaur fossil. All he saw was this. He took it home, left it in his home for a while. He was just an amateur collector. The story goes that he came to a point in time where he needed to pay off some bills, so he thought he would clean this up and try to sell it. And supposedly when he cleaned it up, this is what he found: a human footprint side by side with the dinosaur footprint. Now this is a theropod dinosaur footprint, or at least what they believe it to be. Some people do. And this is a authenticated, genuine theropod dinosaur footprint. So you can see some similarities there. Now, I've kind of drawn the lines there in case you couldn't see it to begin with, but this is the dinosaur track, this is the human track. I would recommend checking out this video right here for a good example of, they have subjected this fossil to CT scan imaging and made composite images of it and demonstrated that there are genuine compression artifacts within this fossil. And to be fair, if you want to check out this website here, this particular page on it, this is the evolutionist part of it, the anti-creation. I would recommend reading up on both. You can make a decision on whether or not you believe it's real. I think it's plausible, but I believe that there needs to be more in-depth research into this. I don't think that one side has proved it either way. It is interesting though. So let's go over some evidences why dinosaurs are not as old as evolutionists will have you believe. There have been soft tissues, T-Rex tissues, that have been found in a supposedly 69 million year old T-Rex. There have been what many have described as red blood cells that have been found. There have been studies on this, and they've said that these are pyroid framboids, and that they're just artifacts of what used to be red blood cells, and blah blah blah. But here's the question: if these pyrite framboids, which are still organic in nature, are as old as the red blood cells would have been themselves, then here's the question: why haven't they also fossilized? So Mary Schweitzer is the paleontologist who discovered this, and these are some different pictures of on more than one occasion they have found soft tissue in what are supposed to be dinosaur fossils. These are the supposed red blood cells that are going right through a blood vessel of a T-Rex. We have a blood vessel of a hadrosaur, which is like the duck-billed dinosaurs, and these are supposed to be red blood cells. And this is also a vein going through a triceratops. So why can we find soft tissues in things that are supposed to be tens of millions of years old when these things should have long since fossilized? And according to even modern physics, organic materials, even in the best state, put them in a vacuum, shield them from light and heat, etc., etc., the protein should break down due to entropy over time in no more than 100,000 years. So Mary Schweitzer said, "I had focused on something inside the vessels. A colleague took one look at them and shouted, 'You've got red blood cells!' Finding remains of dinosaur blood cells would have astounding implications. But more work needs to be done before we are confident enough to come right out and say, yes, this T-Rex has blood compounds left in its tissues. Well, there's been a lot of work done on this since she first made that statement. And we'll get to that in just a second. But there are other cases of soft tissue that have been found in what should have been fossilized. Unfossilized duck-billed dinosaur bones have been found in the north slope of Alaska. Unfossilized frozen dinosaur bones have been found in Alaska. Collagen fibers have been found in the T-Rex femur bone, and Triceratops and Hadrosaur femur bones contained collagen. Now, collagen is an organic molecule that should have long since decayed. Here are some more examples. These are blood vessels of a modern ostrich, and these are blood vessels from a woolly mammoth. As you can see, they are very similar. These are red blood cells, and these little things here and there and there and there and there and there are supposed to be red blood cells as well. Even woolly mammoths are supposed to be more than 100,000 years old, so why do we find soft tissues in them? Again, Mary Schweitzer, I'm quite aware that according to conventional wisdom and models of fossilization, these structures are not supposed to be there, but there they are, and I was pretty shocked. Translucent blood vessels, by all the rules of paleontology, should have long since drained from the bones. It's a matter of faith among scientists that soft tissue can survive at most for a few tens of thousands of years, not the 65 million since T-Rex supposedly walked what is now the Hell Creek Formation in Montana. And this is the most appalling thing to me. Schweitzer sent her evidence to another paleontologist. He said, I had one reviewer tell me that he did not care what the data said. He knew that what I was finding was not possible. I wrote back and said, well, what data would convince you? And he said, none. That's not science, that's belief. Recently, evolutionists have confessed to soft tissues in other animals that they have found, such as a supposedly 90 million year old Santana-raptor muscle tissue, supposedly 10 million year old frog marrow, like from their bones, 400,000 year old bear DNA, which DNA is held together by hydrogen bonds, which are some of the weakest that we find in nature. So for DNA to remain intact for 400,000 years is a ridiculously hopeful thought. 300,000 year old mammoth connective tissue, Neanderthal DNA, of which they have actually been able to sequence, and they've proven now that Neanderthals were humans. They're now called Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, whereas modern humans are called Homo sapiens sapiens. Why does it matter? Biochemical kinetic laws say that proteins cannot last even 40,000 years. Evolutionists ignore science laws and just say Schweitzer's work is just showing us we really don't understand decay. There's lots of really basic stuff in nature that people just make assumptions about. And this is true. This was an actual quote. Instead of saying maybe these bones aren't as old as we thought they were, all they said is we really don't understand decay. They're unwilling to accept other possibilities. So which should we trust? The known laws of science or the assumptions that evolutionists make? This is a picture of an actual mummified hadrosaur which was found in ice. Now, this is obviously, we've got some soft tissue there. And for someone to find this animal had to escape predators, scavengers, and degradation by weather and water, which means not only did it not have to escape predators while it was alive, it had to have things not eat away at its tissues after it died. Then a chemical process must have mineralized the tissue before bacteria ate it, and finally the remains had to survive millions of years undamaged. With the set cooling and heating patterns of the Earth, I find that very unlikely. They found two mummified dinosaurs. One was supposedly 67 million years old, and it was a hadrosaur. Leonardo, as he was named, was a 77 million year old duck-billed dinosaur, and It's been quoted as saying, for paleontologists, if you can find one complete specimen in a lifetime, you've hit the jackpot. It's pretty amazing to find something that intact. Current theories about fossil preservation hold that organic molecules should not preserve beyond 100,000 years. Schweitzer hopes that further research will reveal exactly what the soft structures isolated from these bones are made of. Do they consist of the original cells, and if so, do the cells still contain genetic information? Her early studies of the material suggest that at least some fragments of the dinosaur's original molecular material still may be present. We may not really know as much about fossils as we thought. Let's continue. Some more evidences of soft tissues. Blood cells must have experienced at least 65 million years in the fossil record for this pterosaurian supposed fossil that had soft tissue in it. What they found in there were that there were cell-like compounds that were primarily of iron, and they actually found heme compounds in this. And to go back to the T-Rex that was found by Mary Schweitzer, they have done subsequent tests on it, and they have found that there were iron-containing and heme compounds in it, things that you would typically only find in red blood cells. So there's that old evolutionist adage that you can't carbon date fossils. Well, then tell me why they've found carbon in all of these samples. Now you can say, well, maybe it was contaminated, which is a possibility, but we'll get into some more reasons why dating through radiometric dating methods is often faulty, and I have an entire presentation on that, which will be coming up as soon as I can get it up. So these are different dinosaurs that using different methods, they have radiometric dating methods, carbon-14 dating methods, they have found supposed ages of these. And as you can see, none of these really extend any farther than about 38,000 years. You're not supposed to be able to carbon date fossils. Their carbon decays so much faster than something like uranium would. So there should not be any organic carbon or carbon-14 left in these fossils, yet they're getting these ages for them. When you're using carbon-14 to date something, you can bet on it that you cannot date anything more than 100,000 years. It has a set decay rate, which is 5,730 year half-life, which essentially every 5,730 years you can expect that there's going to be half of the amount of carbon-14 that there was that many years prior. The dating is supposedly highly reliable up to 50 to 60,000 years, but it makes, like every radiometric dating method, a lot of assumptions. You have to assume that the sample was not contaminated, that you didn't have any carbon-14 going into or out of the sample. You also have to assume that carbon-14 in the atmosphere has reached equilibrium, because based on how much is in the atmosphere, that determines how much an organism takes in. Carbon-14 is produced in the atmosphere. It gets fixed by plants. Plant-eating animals eat it and take it into their bodies, and when they die, they are no longer taking in any more carbon-14. This is how we can determine how old something supposedly is, by using this. You also have to make the assumption that the decay rate of carbon-14 has never changed. In terms of other dating methods like uranium to lead, you have to make the assumption that in billions of years and in hundreds of millions of years that the decay rate never changed. And it's nice if we could just say that based on today's rates we can make assumptions back that far, but the truth is they are assumptions. We do not know for sure. And I will be going over on another presentation some evidences that actually demonstrate that it is most likely that the decay rate did speed up exponentially at least once in Earth's history. Here's some examples of bad dates that we have found using carbon dating. They dated the shell of a living mollusk to being 23,000 years old. They dated a living snail's shell to be 27,000 years old. They dated a seal as being 515 to 715 years old, which obviously, if it's still alive, it's not that old. And they dated another seal to be 1,300 years old. Just some good examples of why carbon dating is not very trustworthy. Now, this, in my opinion, is one of the real kickers. Diamonds are the strongest material known to man currently. They form a very strong matrix. They are formed inside of coal, which are under tremendous pressure. I mean, imagine entire mountains pressing down on coal. And diamonds are, in general, just pure carbon that has been really, really firmly pressed together. So there's a project called the RATE project, which was headed by Dr. John Baumgartner, physicist. And so let's go back over this. Carbon has a half-life of 5,730 years, which means after every 5,730 years, there's going to be half of the amount of initial carbon in a sample. So what they found by they've carbon dated diamonds, which are supposed to be millions of years old, by the way. And diamonds, because they're such a strong material, the ability of carbon to come into the sample or to come out of it, in other words, for contamination to happen, is so unlikely. And when they've carbon dated the diamonds, they've found them to be around 55,700 years old, which, according to modern science, that would essentially mean that the Earth cannot be that old. It cannot be. The Earth is supposedly 4.5 billion years old. Well, if it was that old, there should not be any carbon-14 left in the diamonds. It had undergone approximately 10 half-lives, and there were more than 10 times the detectable limit of carbon in the diamonds. You shouldn't be able to find any carbon in these diamonds. So, did we get birds evolving from dinosaurs? I don't believe we did, and let's go over why not. This is a picture of Archaeopteryx. For a while now, it's been in standing known as the earliest known bird, which would be about 150 million years old. But it's interesting. Let's go over why this couldn't be a transitional fossil, why it's not a missing link. This was a graphic depiction of how dinosaurs, theropod dinosaurs in particular, evolved wings and evolved into birds over time. It looks pretty convincing, right? You have something that looks like it's pretty reptilian in nature, moving on, it's gaining some feathers, a little bit more feathers, a little bit more, finally we get what we see today as a regular bird. Well, here's the problem, and here's why I feel like evolutionists in this case were trying to lie. I mean, just downright lie. So this looks convincing until you look at how old these things were actually supposed to be. This should be moved here. This should be moved here. That should be moved there, that should be moved there, that should be moved there, and this should be the final thing. They have placed them out of order on purpose to try to convince you of something that does not exist. So let's look at this a little bit more. What you actually see, if they were to have put these in the correct order according to how old they have dated these fossils, is you have something that looks most like a modern bird wing evolving into something that looks very reptile-like, into something that looks very bird-like again, into something that looks kind of bird-like, back into something that looks the most reptile-like, and then common bird wing. if you're telling me that that isn't a little bit deceitful, I mean, I don't see how you don't see it. So I'm going to read this real quick. Although Archaeopteryx is generally considered the earliest bird on record, a recent find suggests that the creature, which lived some 130 million years ago, may not have been the only bird alive then. A new fossil found by James Jensen dates back to the same period, the late Jurassic. The specimen is now being examined by John Ostrom of Yale University's Peabody Museum of Natural History, who is trying to verify its identity. Ostrom says it looks more like a bird bone than anything else. While he has some reservations about the identification, he asserts, if it's not a bird bone, I don't know what else it is. Now this, they're saying that they found a bird bone before Archaeopteryx, and Archaeopteryx is supposed to be the missing link between dinosaurs and birds. If birds existed alongside or before dinosaurs, then how did dinosaurs evolve into birds? The hypothesis that Archaeopteryx represents a direct link for reptiles to birds has been generally accepted. The existence of another bird, one that was an adept flyer and thus more advanced on the evolutionary scale, would present a challenge to that hypothesis. The situation also presents Ostrom with something of a delicate dilemma, for he is one of the principal developers of the evidence regarding the evolutionary role of Archaeopteryx. Although the paleontologist says that the identification of the new fossil is about 90% certain, he points out that it is not exactly like any of the numerous bones of modern birds with which he has compared it. So this is another graphic depiction that evolutionists have come out with to try to convince you that we can go from theropod dinosaurs here to modern birds. There's only one problem. You see the way they have this lined out. It looks like it's going from something dinosaur-like, well, from a dinosaur to something a little bit more bird-like, a little bit more bird-like. Here's Archaeopteryx. Here's Caudipteryx, blah, 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 blah. Here's modern bird. But when you look at the dates that have been given according to radiometric dating, which that'll be another presentation, I'll go over why radiometric dating is pretty faulty as well. You get that this is 220 million years old. This is 67 million years old. This is 130, 67, 140, 150. So let's rearrange that and see what it actually looks like. You have something that looks like it's very dinosaur-like. Then Archaeopteryx. Then something a little bit less bird-like, back to reptilian, more dinosaur-like, a little bit less dinosaur-like, modern birds. Very deceitful, if you ask me. Now, there are a lot of anatomical changes that would have had to occur for dinosaurs to evolve into birds. And I know I do apologize for this presentation being kind of text and word heavy, but there's just so much good information I want to get out there. So theropods versus Archaeopteryx. Theropods were Saurischian, not ornithischian, which that has to do with the way that their hips are oriented, and I've got some pictures of that here in a minute. Theropods have the first to third of the usual 5 digits, where, if you were to look at your hands, starting with your thumb being 1 and your pinky being 5, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Theropods have the first to the third of the usual 5 digits, whereas birds have the second to the fourth. Such short limbs that we would find on a dinosaur, like a theropod, like a velociraptor, were hardly credible precursors for the extended and well-developed forelimbs of birds, including those of Archaeopteryx, which must support their wings. Typical of running animals, theropods, dinosaurs, lacked clavicles, which are present in Archaeopteryx and fused to form the familiar wishbone, which contributes to the support of the wing. And Archaeopteryx had a significantly larger brain case, reflecting the need for additional sensory input and motor control required for flying. So let's compare reptile lungs to bird lungs. Avian lungs have 9 different air sacs, 2 in the back, 2 here, 1 there, 2 there. And their air sacs even extend partially into their bones, which are hollow, to enable them to be lighter so they can fly better. So this is what a bird's lung or respiratory system looks like. This is what a reptile's lung respiratory system looks like. Just very similar to ours. You breathe in, air goes in the lungs, breathe back out. When a bird breathes, air goes back into these sacs, which pushes air into the next sacs, and what you end up is the bird is essentially breathing twice with every breath. It's a way for the bird to get the most oxygen out of each breath that it's taking without having to exert any additional effort. So let's go over this a little bit more. What's even more interesting is that bird's lungs, the way that the air flows, runs anti-parallel to the blood flow, which even increases the amount of oxygen that is diffusing across into their bloodstream. For a reptile lung to change into a bird lung by small steps while remaining functional throughout and providing a greater advantage at each step defies imagination, according to Dr. Michael Denton, an open-minded evolutionist. Actually, bats do very well with the bellows type of lung. This makes the selectionist argument for the origin of birds' lungs, i.e., that they needed them, even more difficult to sustain. So let's go back. I said I had got some pictures for you. These are the hips of a saurischian organism versus an ornithischian organism. Saurischian hips are typical of reptiles and what you would see in dinosaurs, and this is typical of bird hips. As you can see, there's some rather difficult differences between here. Now, what's interesting is theropod dinosaurs had the saurischian type of hip, not the ornithischian. So not only would those dinosaurs have had to evolve this type of hip into this, they didn't have the ornithischian to begin with. You would expect them to have bird-like hips to begin with. You would have to have the evolution of scales into feathers, and that may not seem like a big venture, but let's show you some reasons why it is. As you can see, scales here, although they are layered, in general, these are just keratinized layers of skin that grow outward, whereas the feathers have multiple components to them. They're very complicated. This is a close-up of what a feather looks like, and as you can see, there's these little barbules in between, and it's essentially like Velcro. If you've ever seen a bird preen itself, what it's doing is connecting these barbules together so that it can get more lift during flight. Every bird feather has a calamus, or the quill, which is the base of the feather. It has a rachis, or what we would call, in modern or just slang, just the shaft of the feather. It has barbs that come out, and in between these barbs, right in between here, and here's a close-up, are barbules, and these are these little structures here. They are very, very complicated structures. This is an example of a theropod dinosaur. In order for this to evolve into a bird, these little guys here would have to evolve into this, which you can see, this is a highly adapted, very, very, I would say, well-designed structure, whereas these are, if you can see the bones in here, you've got three, you've got your main metacarpals in here, and here you've got all sorts of different bones, and you've got to have all these ways for the feathers to connect. It's just to go from something this short to something, comparatively speaking, this long and well adapted is highly unlikely. So if you've ever ate Thanksgiving, you know what a wishbone is. The technical term for that, the anatomical term, is the furcula. It's the fusion of these two clavicle bones. Now, in birds, what that does is it enables more flight. It's more for more muscle attachment. Well, theropod dinosaurs lacked that. They did not have a furcula, so they would have to end up having a fused bone for that reason. If we compare digits, I mentioned earlier, the different numbers of the digits that theropod dinosaurs and Archaeopteryx would have had. Where it was, yes, theropods had the first to the third of the usual 5, whereas birds had the second to the fourth. Here's a graphic depiction of that. This would have been what a theropod's finger bones would have looked like. This is what a bird's finger bones look like. As you can see, there's a significant difference in curvature, and they're not the same bones. So when you're talking about an animal like Archaeopteryx, which is supposed to be a transitional link, they consider it a transitional link because it contains characteristics of both reptiles and birds. But let's take an example from a modern organism that we know is real and that we know is not some sort of transitional link, the platypus. And I'm going to use this as an example that just because an animal is a mosaic of different types of organisms does not mean it has to be a transitional link. It doesn't mean it is. It is what it is. The platypus has electric location mechanisms, which just the same way that like a shark can determine where like a fish is based on the electromagnetism it's putting off. Platypuses can do very much the same thing. They have leathery eggs, which is kind of like what you would find in a snake in certain cases. They have milk glands, and they also have poison glands. And this is a quote by Dr. Gary Parker. The platypus was at first considered a hoax by evolutionists since its weird set of traits made it difficult even to guess what it was evolving from or into. So again, Archaeopteryx could have just been one of those creatures. If he was alive today, what would we say that he was evolving into or evolving from? We could just say very similar to the platypus. He is. So here's that ever-present question: what actually killed the dinosaurs? So after the flood, after all these animals get off of Noah's Ark, just like anything that can kill any other organism, famine and overcrowding, disease. You would imagine that all the diseases that could have been on the earth present at the time of the flood would have been mixed around all over the world by the flood waters. So you could have an increase in diseases. Could have been hunted for meat and exterminated, although I don't know that they would have been hunted for meat because according to the Bible they would not have been ritually clean animals or okay to eat. But you imagine these huge animals going around, you've got to find some way to control them, otherwise they're going to kill you. There is proof there was less oxygen in the environment afterwards, and of course you had disrupted food webs afterwards. And I'd like to give a shout out to Dr. G. Charles Jackson, who has a PhD in science education. He is kind of like my creation father. He got me interested in doing presentations and in really seeking out the truth for myself. Of course, I've been doing research into evolution and creation now for, I believe, about 7 years. So thank you, Dr. Jackson. And I'd like to thank God for just guiding me on these presentations. And so let's get into the works cited. I'm going to leave these up for a few seconds. You can pause if you'd like to. If you had questions about anything you saw, just look up what's in parentheses. You can look up what site it was taken from, and you can look it up for yourself. If you enjoyed this, please leave comments, please rate, and please subscribe. God bless you all.